I've had the opportunity to meet Jack over the last couple of weeks, and I just said to him, I think I've made a friend for life because one of the most sincerest people, uh, incredible sense of humor. So that always makes, brings a lot of love and laughter to a conversation, but also a man driven by such purpose. And you would have recognized over the last couple of podcasts as well, purpose really is at the core of those that set out to achieve a lot for themselves individually. And it also is the driver of those who achieve a lot for their collective communities as well. And with that, I have such pleasure. It gives me such pleasure to invite Jack to be in our podcast today. Jack, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome. I already feel slightly like a fraud because there's coffee in the title, and as an Englishman, I prefer tea.
Okay.
So for the purpose of this, I think we should be candid tea.
Candid tea. I like that. So we shall have candid tea with Jack
We
today.
will. It will be just as candid, but just have more of an English flavor.
Well, Jack, I'm South African, as you know, right? So we grow up
Or
with tea as well, but I'm partly
exactly.
American, so I've got a good balance of tea and coffee
You
going
do. You
on.
do.
Wow,
You have a good beverage balance.
huge balance. So listeners, Jack is the CEO of Pride 365, and he has been an ally to the LGBT community for all his life. But what Jack has also shared with me is an incredible story of how he came to actually start Pride 365 as well. This on the back of an incredible career in sales and sales leadership and being the CEO of companies which have a very strong sales orientation. So Jack, I'd love for you to share with us a little bit of your journey and importantly tell us how Pride 365 came to be.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I've been in sales from the age of 18. And the reason for that is I was well educated and I was on my way to university. I was privately educated, and my father died when I was 17. And so we went from having money to having none. And so, where I was planning to go to art college and then to study law, all of a sudden I had to get a job and look after my mother. And I was very fortunate, and I know it's a strange context within which to talk about fortune, but I was very fortunate in that, necessity being the mother of invention, I gravitated towards sales. Why? Well, as I said, I didn't have money to get educated. I had to earn money. I didn't have money to buy stock and open a shop. I mean, what was I to do? So I started in sales very early, and I found that it was something that I loved, and I've always thrived in it. And the ability to be creative, to forge relationships, to provide client end benefit and commission was something that has always been part of my DNA. The area that I gravitated towards was publishing, and hence we'll get on to Pride 365. And again, quite early on in my life, I formed at a kitchen table a publishing company called Profile Pursuit with a man called Steve Anderson and a lady called Lisa Taylor. And we built that company from that kitchen table to being a public company. It was publicly quoted in the UK, but we had offices in the UK and the US. We were the very first publishers of a coffee table lifestyle publication for the LGBT community. Steve Anderson is gay, was gay, is still gay to this day. He's been with Roger for 35 years, which in straight terms is like having a marriage of 900 years or so. And at that time, when we called advertisers and mentioned the L word or the G word, there was no T word then, really. People would often say, I'm sorry, you want me to associate my brand with them or with that, and be really disparaging and often put the phone down. And we were also trying to secure sponsorships for London, New York, San Francisco, and Washington Prides. And often we would receive the same kind of response. And it was incredibly hard work. We made it successful, but it was very, very hard work. You come forward all of these years, and about 5 years ago, I noticed that during Pride Month, every company on the planet seemed to want to celebrate the LGBT community, swear undying love to it, drape their LinkedIns, Facebook, Instagram with all manner of rainbow accoutrement, probably singing "Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay" at their desks if their boss walked by. But it often lacked sincerity. And so Pride 365 essentially is a business, it's a certification business that works with companies that want to be authentic in their support of the community all year round. And what's important about that is that it's like any cultural appropriation or misappropriation. Work needs to be sincere and authentic. And all of the research from the LGBT community, and it's a very significant demographic, both in terms of numbers and indeed spending power, is that they both want to work for and spend their money with companies that are genuine in their support of them.
Yeah. And Jack, just listening to you and hearing about how there's an explosion of advertising, of support during, the Pride Month. I think that is definitely something that we all see, we all notice, but some of the other, it just passes through, right? And now you've created, Jack, what I thought was very interesting, a seal of approval, Pride 365 seal of approval. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. So 5 years ago, when I saw all of this going on, and that process of kind of misappropriation, just in the way that we have greenwashing in society, is called pinkwashing or rainbow washing. So about 5 years ago, I approached my friends at Interpride, who are the umbrella organization for the Pride movement worldwide, and said, we need to do something about this. And my idea was simple, which is, in order to be authentic, two things need to happen. One, the lived experience of your LGBT staff needs to be great. In other words, they're treated with the same respect, dignity, and have the same opportunity as anyone else. Not better, just equal opportunity. And secondly, I always see business as potentially being a power of good. So certification is based on two things. One, what incremental improvements is an organization willing to make within their place of work? And two, what good can they do in the wider society, in the wider community? So, and that's all of our partners have in common, is they make a pledge. They go through a process and they make a pledge of those commitments over a rolling 3-year period. And we're working with the likes of Nissan, Utilitor, Hilton, to name a few.
That's very inspiring, Jack. And I'd like to pick up on one of the aspects. You said two things, right? Incremental changes in their workplace and also good in the larger community. And hone in a little bit on the word incremental. You and I had a conversation last week where we spoke about you can't go from zero to hero. So how do you build that? Talk a little bit about these incremental changes, Jack.
So we start the process by sending a survey to the business and finding out where they are. So we benchmark them, of course, against excellence. However, we do not in any way believe in indices where you're comparing one company to another, because how do you compare a pharma business with a petrochemical company, with a bank, with a pillow shop? I mean, it's palpably ludicrous. So we then put together with them, so we work collegiately in partnership with them, a roadmap of small, incremental, but meaningful improvements that they can make both in terms of the culture within the organization, but also what they're willing to do in the wider society. Because in my view, in our view, if I may say, you can't process and policy and procedure your way to happiness. You can only do that through culture. You can only do that by creating an atmosphere within which people are respected, valued, and can thrive. And going back 25 years, almost by happenstance, Steve, Lisa, and I were doing DE&I before it was a thing. We just brought a whole bunch of cool people together, not caring less, really, what they looked like, who they loved, let's be honest, who they had sex with, couldn't care less. Could you do the job? Could you work with respect and dignity with your colleagues? And the answer was yes. And if you give people from marginalized groups an opportunity, it's incredible that the kind of loyalty and industry and commitment that you're given back. It's not surprising if you think about it. You treat someone with respect, and you treat them well, they will. And so our staff retention, it was difficult for us to get rid of anyone. It was, even when we wanted to let them go, they refused. In fact, I'm sure we had a few people who were with us for years, and it's not quite clear what they did, but God bless them. Anyway, so the point being, Pride 365 is important in that it gives business an opportunity without pointing fingers, without saying, how dare you not have this? How dare you not do that? We do not call anyone out. What we do is we invite people in. We're apolitical, but we will guide you almost like a personal trainer. So if I have a personal trainer, it doesn't matter how good they are, I'm never going to run for Great Britain in the next Olympic Games. It's not going to happen. But what I can do is get a little bit better. And so Pride 365 work in the same way. We make each of our partners better and the lives of their staff enhanced.
And Jack, you're so right, because I think sometimes the task can feel too enormous, and so folks don't want to engage in it. So I love this incremental benefit piece that you're looking at. That really resonates in terms of how do you get people to come on the journey with you as well, right? Talking about taking companies on a journey, recognizing, we live in a world today, in the last 2 years, there's been a significant amount of talk, especially when you've had banks collapse, in the last year, where we've had banks collapse to say too much of D&I and focusing on the wrong things, etc. Tell me a little bit about how you see this kind of like rhetoric that goes on around why D&I is important and when we should let it go, when we should focus on it.
Look, DE, and so diversity, equity, and inclusion is an incredibly divisive topic. And like anything, if you take anything to their extremes, I understand why it's divisive. The difference with what we are doing is when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we mean what the words actually say. We're not saying equality, but then you have to prioritize the minorities over the majority. But what we're saying is that everyone needs an equal opportunity to thrive, and it should be based on merit. But create an atmosphere, create a culture where merit and the cream rises to the top. So at a time where some businesses struggle, it is very, very easy to point a finger and say it's the fault of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's nonsense. It's palpably nonsense. There's good D&I and there's bad DE&I. Good DE&I works with the commercial arm of a business and helps it thrive. There is enormous amounts of research which says that if you have a diverse workforce and a diverse board, your business will be more successful than if it is not. That's one. Secondly, diversity of thought for a strong leadership or a strong board should be welcomed, because it is, again, palpably ludicrous to think that any one group of people have a monopoly on intelligence or insight. So gather as much insight and intelligence as you possibly can. And so there are many businesses out there who have been doing this for years and brilliantly. And you mentioned banking. Goldman Sachs aren't struggling, and they were one of the first early adopters of diversity, equity, and inclusion within the business. The chief exec at the time said, even if it costs me money, and I don't think it will, it's the right thing to do.
Right.
However, he did it because his business instincts were that if he gets it right, he's going to make even more money. And indeed they have. So that's point one. But point two, if you look at the sheer demographic, the sheer numbers, just look at it as a numbers game for a moment with the LGBT community. It is estimated that 17% of the population of the West is going to be somewhere on the continuum by 2030. That's not a long time in the future. So again, what was once seen as a niche, nice to do business endeavor, there's no business on the planet that can ignore nearly 20%, 1/5 of the consumers. And when you consider their consumers with higher than average disposable income, it is a business imperative. So to answer your question specifically, if DE&I is purely seen as an industry where you get a load of personnel or HR staff force feeding you courses you must learn or you're a bad human being, I completely agree. It's not great. But when you have DE&I working sensibly, when you have them working in partnership with the commercial arms of the business, then you have businesses that will thrive and will be much, much more successful.
No, Jack, thank you for sharing that. And I took three things away from that. Of course, all you said was so rich in its content, but I took the examples you gave about Goldman Sachs and Times. We do the right thing first, right? Do the right thing and attach it to also your business making money, so the commercial part of the work as well, and then understand how to position your business for the future, because by ignoring the LGBTQ community, you're going to ignore 1/5 of all consumers in your environment in the future.
Exactly. And another way to look at it is this. Let's say you have two individuals who give equal amounts to a charity of their choice. So let's say they each give $10,000 to a charity. One does it because they want to scream from the rooftops to the community what marvelous human beings they are. So they're doing it because they know it's going to get back to their friends and their colleagues. They'll look at that generous guy, he's given $10,000. And the other person gives $10,000 anonymously. Now, the question is, of the two, who's better? Now, I think that's a false narrative, because in either case, charities are benefiting by $10,000. So what I mean by this is, if a company embraces what we are doing because it wants to earn more money, and as a byproduct of that, good is done, great. If another company embraces what we're doing because they want to be on the side of the angels, and as a byproduct of that, they make more money, great. So the point is, there are two equally compelling reasons to be involved with Pride 365, but ultimately all of the benefits coalesce.
Right, right.
Does that
So
make sense?
absolutely. I think I totally understand that. And you're saying whichever angle you're coming from it, you have to look at the end results, right? Does the end result actually, is it beneficial at the end? And are you actually doing good
Yes.
in your company? And then you
But,
take it from there.
but even more straightforwardly, if we speak to a company, and I'm not saying we do, but if we speak to a company who is doing it because they want to protect their bottom line, or they're not doing it for the purest of reasons,
Hmm.
it's not the end of the world, because ultimately good's going to be done.
Right. So, Jack, maybe a little bit of controversy. And you and I have had some nice
I like that.
controversial. How do you feel about the point of intent, right? Intent. Does intent matter here in terms of, and let me share with you why I asked this question. Because intent determines whether you will continue or you won't continue with something if the circumstances become tough or difficult, or maybe it doesn't. How do you feel about intent?
I'm a pragmatist.
Yeah.
So I like to think I have purity of spirit and heart, but ultimately in business, you have to be a pragmatist. Now, if one's intention is to be seen to be doing the right thing,
Right.
but as a byproduct of that, you are forced to do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
is that so bad? Ultimately, if the staff's quality of life becomes better, and if the bottom line of the business improves,
Mm-hmm.
even if the first reason for doing something wasn't pure,
Mm-hmm.
pretty soon they'll realize that actually, you know what, we made a decision here. We need to thank our lucky stars and keep with it. Now, however, there has, let's be frank, been a backlash with various organizations where they took silly marketing steps that were incongruous to its specific brand,
Mm-hmm.
and the world lost its mind. We look at Bud Light, for example, that happened. Now, what's tragic about this is Anheuser-Busch have been genuine supporters of the LGBT community for a very long time.
Right.
But what they didn't have was PR, their PR team, on standby when they launched the campaign to actually give context.
Mm. Mm.
And perhaps they chose the wrong brand because. So, I mean, again, and this isn't a party political broadcast for Pride 365, but much of what we do is not just the work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's also marketing and advertising,
Right.
guidance and advice, because that's my background. So simple things. Nissan, who are one of our partners, are sponsors and had been for years of the London Marathon.
Mm-hmm.
So I spoke to them about, all right, so you're now Pride 365 certified. How do we show that you're authentic in your support of the LGBT community, but also just of wider society, of everyone? And so for the last couple of years, we've had an LGBT cheer zone at the London Marathon, and indeed at the whole Great Run series, where
Right.
people from the community and their allies can come celebrate the event. But Nissan are obviously marketing themselves everywhere along the route.
Right.
Again, it's just being thoughtful. Hilton, another example. I pointed out to them that 73% of the LGBT community has a fur baby, has a dog, let's
Yeah.
say. And so I said, when a couple, a gay couple, lesbian couple, come and stay with you and want to bring their fur baby, let's just be mindful
Mm.
and sympathetic in our approach to LGBT marketing. So they came up with a campaign called Bon Appetit, so that when you turn up at the hotel, you and your partner get a gift, your fur baby gets a gift. It's a really joyous, lovely thing. But again, it's not rocket science, but it's being intelligent in
Right.
understanding your business and your customers. And
Absolutely.
Pride 365 help in that regard too.
I love that example about Bon Appetit. It's so
Yes, Bon
interesting.
Appetit is sweet.
Yeah. And
I
also
know.
just understanding your customer, as you were saying, right?
Yeah,
And you put the numbers really clearly. If 1/5 of the consumer population by 2030 will come from the LGBTQ community,
yes,
recognizing who your customer is and their impact is going to be what is critical for your business, right?
exactly. And also when you think about the gay or the queer community, even that in and of itself is incredibly diverse.
Yes,
So understanding that as well is important. But
absolutely.
that's for another day.
So I want to ask a little bit about a term you used earlier on, Jack, called pinkwashing, right?
Yes,
Can you share a little bit tell us about what is pinkwashing?
I can. I mean, are you familiar with the term greenwashing or
Yes,
sports washing?
yes, yes.
So it's often, and for example, Saudi Arabia is currently being criticized for sports washing, or Qatar was for when it got the soccer, in your language, my football World Cup. And it's basically where an organization or a country culturally misappropriate a thing.
Yeah.
So it's where a petrochemical company will sponsor, let's say, a flower show,
Mm,
hoping
mm,
that the flower show will give a halo effect and people will forget the fact that they're polluting the oceans and ruining the world. Not
right.
that I'm saying that necessarily. And please don't direct any feedback to me. My lawyers are. No, I'm not saying that. So, but so from a greenwashing perspective, environmental perspective, that's a good example.
Mm,
Petrochemical company sponsor a garden festival. Now, what often happens is that within the LGBT community, again, companies will, during LGBT History Month or Pride Month, talk about their love, respect of the LGBT community and post various things. But where's the proof?
mm,
Where is the lived experience of your own staff that says this is real?
mm.
And so Pride 365 basically works with companies that are real and authentic in this space. So they're not perfect. None of us are perfect. How can you be perfect when you're dealing with something as complex as humanity? All of us get things wrong all of the time. But that's okay. I mean, what if I had to boil what we do down to its most prosaic? It's simply this. It's create an environment where we encourage dialogue and conversation.
Right.
Why? Because when we speak enough and we do it from a pure place, we all realize we have so much more in common than the things that supposedly divide us.
Agree. Totally, totally agree. So, Jack, one last question before we come to the end of our podcast. And I feel like I can talk for a long time, but I don't think the time frame will allow me to. But I'd like to hear from you. You and I spoke so much about what it meant to be an ally, right?
Yes.
And I'd love for you to share with our listeners what it means for you to be an ally and what it may mean in context of a board to be an ally as well.
Yeah, so great. So an ally in LGBT plus terms is nothing more than I mean, I hate the term, but a straight person, let's call it a person, that has empathy and is willing to align that empathy to action. So, and there are millions of us. There are millions and millions of us who have empathy and have the ability, if we so choose, to take action that brings people together. So if you look at any great movement over the years, you look at the civil rights movement, for example, in America, you look at Mandela and the battle against apartheid in South Africa, all of those were won when allies and the community that was being oppressed came together, and there was a change of direction for good. Now, from a board's perspective, the reason it is fundamentally important is that an ally is often, and it's sad but true, easier to listen to than it is when you actually speak directly to someone from the community. And it's shocking that that is true, but unfortunately it is. So it is very, very important that an ally acts as a bridge between the board and the LGBT staff and make sure that there is implementation of the kind of cultural improvement that I was speaking to you about earlier. And often an ally on a board will act as the sponsor and make sure that there is funding in place so that activity for the LGBT community, and indeed, and I'll go on to this, an ally network can take place. So an ally network basically is a group of people that are allies that work with the LGBT community, and they build bridges. So eventually they coalesce and become one group. Because I hate silos. People talk about, I mean, the fact that there's Black Lives Matter or Pride Month. I mean, of course, it's important that we celebrate diversity, but ultimately, what I would like to see is a society where my organization is obsolete. It is palpably bad that my organization has to exist in terms of bringing people together and getting companies to do the right thing. I'd like to think that one day it will just happen naturally. But as my grandmother would say, I should live so long. It's not. So we'll be here for a while yet.
Jack, thank you. I think, we spent the last 35 minutes with just scratching the surface of this conversation, right? Really just scratching the surface. And I'm acutely aware we are two allies having this conversation.
Yes.
Without members of the LGBTQ community in this conversation as well, right? But hopefully we also build bridges
Exactly.
to this conversation. And I love what you shared around it. Being an ally means empathy in action or with action. And putting that into context from a board perspective as well is making sure that when you are sitting on a board, you have that lens in mind and you are advocating for the benefits of all.
And not just benefits, not just in terms of policy, but also your recruitment. Right. As an ally, you will be aware that you have a more diverse board, you're going to be more successful. And therefore, you need to advocate to have more women, more people from the LGBT community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. Well, Jack, thank you so much. And I'm going to close our podcast listeners with something you said right in the beginning that's sat with me throughout the entire conversation, Jack. You said you can't policy your way to happiness, right? But you can build a culture of appreciation and joy, which is such an incredibly humble statement, but most importantly, it cuts to the core of understanding that it is by understanding people that we are able to make change, by stepping into the shoes of people for a short period of time, we're able to at least see a different side of the world that what we are actually used to seeing as well, and gives us an opportunity to open ourselves up to what could possibly be if we allowed all of ourselves, as you said earlier on, to actually sink into our own humanity, which I think is powerful.
Brilliant, you said. Absolutely. Focus on people. Focus on people with dignity and respect.
I love that. So, Jack, thank you so much for being on Candid Coffee. I loved having you on, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation. But listeners and those on the podcast, I think what Jack has also shared with us is this is a conversation that must be ongoing in all different forums. And it is a conversation where we must introspect ourselves around how do we engage with people around us from all different walks of life. In particular, in this conversation, how are we actually allies for our LGBTQ community as well? So, Jack, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.